So, pretty much every week, Kubo answers fan questions over on his Klub Outside Q&A platform. A lot of the time, they are mostly light-hearted fluff or relatively superfluous points that don't really warrant any kind of a discussion. However, sometimes Kubo will drop a tantalizing piece of new information that piques my interest. This week, he went and dropped 2 at the same time, and I really wanted to talk about them, one of them in particular. I've reported on several of Kubo's more pressing answers before in the past, but this time I wanted to try something new and cover a couple of weeks' worth of answers at once in a kind of Klub Outside Q&A Round-Up video, where we look at some of Kubo's latest answers and dissect them a little bit. If this is something you'd like to see more of in the future, depending on Kubo's answers that is, do please let me know. I don't plan on covering every single answer he's ever said in this series, just the ones that interest me the most, and we can retroactively look at some of the ones that have been and gone as well. This week, however, the questions focus on Sternritter J, Quilge Opie, and his surprising usage of Ransoutengai, and the inner workings of Gin's Bankai, Kamishini no Yari, and its ultimate poisonous technique. While the questions we're looking at from the week before focus on Ayon and Minazuki. We'll start things off by diving into the Quilge Opie question, as that's the one I find by far the most intriguing of the bunch. Regarding Quilge, Kubo was asked why Quilge Opie was able to use Ransoutengai when no other Sternritter did in the source material. And this is definitely a great question and one I am very glad to see asked. It's well known by now that Quilge was effectively the perfect introduction to the Sternritter, being the first major enemy our heroes came up against in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Unfortunately, Quilge was almost too good of a bad guy. He was brutal, ruthlessly efficient, and determined to hinder Ichigo at any cost, and used every single trick in his Quincy arsenal to do so. Having been blasted through the chest by Urahara, Quilge was seemingly killed, except mere moments later the Sternritter rose to his feet again thanks to Ransoutengai, an extremely advanced Quincy technique where the practitioner lifts their ruined body with strings of reishi like a puppet, enabling a Quincy to keep fighting even when their physical form is broken. Seeing Quilge use Ransoutengai back in the day was awesome. It was the first time we'd seen the technique since Uryu used it against Mayuri way back in the Soul Society arc, and it instantly put Quilge on a pedestal. To be able to use Ransoutengai with such skill was considered a genius-level technique by Mayuri, so Quilge painted a pretty deadly picture of what the Sternritter were capable of. Except we never saw it again. Despite there being plenty of moments during the war where Sternritter were seriously wounded, not a single member of the Vandenreich's elite ever demonstrated the ability to use Ransoutengai ever again. The same was also true of Sklaverai, the innate power of the Quincy to dominate Reishi dialed up to 11. Quilge was the only Sternritter to use this terrifying power in the source material, but this has since been fixed in the anime. However, to this day, anime included, Quilge remains the only Vandenreich soldier to use Ransoutengai, which is a really weird oversight. And so, this week, Kubo was asked why Quilge was the only Sternritter to use it, and if maybe that spoke to his style, his talent, and his overall level of skill. Thanks to a translation by M. Shadows, we have this reply from Kubo. Kubo answered that affirmatively, adding that Quilge is actually the combat instructor of the Sternritter, and that students of his can be found among current troops. Is it just me, or does that seem like quite a big deal to just kind of drop in a Q&A? I can't help but think this is something that probably should have been mentioned at least once in the source material. To be honest, there was always something special about Quilge. He's clearly an extraordinarily capable Quincy. Vicious, domineering, and sadistic, yes, but also a brilliant commander and a real threat. He always seemed odd, as though he were a cut above the rest for some unknown, inexplicable reason. For example, he was made the captain of the hunting army of the Vandenreich, charged with crushing Waco Mundo and taking it under Quincy control, but Quilge also seemed acutely aware of Uryu Ishida's forthcoming position in Yhwach's plans, long before any other Sternritter seemingly had any idea whatsoever. Now, it's absolutely possible that Kubo was working on the fly here with Quilge, since he was the first Sternritter introduced, but I've always liked the idea that he was in actuality rather strong. In fact, about 3 years ago now, when I ranked every single Sternritter by overall strength, I placed Quilge against all odds at 11th, and if anything, this answer simply reinforces my faith in that decision. But anyway, Quilge was apparently the combat instructor of the Sternritter, meaning he taught other Quincy how to fight. Again, this makes perfect sense to me. Quilge's Schrift is extremely situational, meaning of all the Sternritter, he instead makes use of a plethora of much more traditional Quincy techniques when it comes to fighting. There is one aspect, however, to this answer that's not quite clear. Where Kubo says he was the combat instructor of the Sternritter, does that mean he taught other Sternritter, he was their combat instructor, or is it just a way of saying of the Sternritter he was the combat instructor? Semantics, eh? It's kind of annoying like that. And actually, I think it's probably the former of these. Kubo choosing to highlight the fact that several of Quilge's students can now be found among the current-day troops makes me think he is referring to actual named Sternritter. And this is so fascinating, and I'd love to have seen and learnt more about this. I wonder who Quilge was responsible for training. If I had to guess, I'd imagine it includes several of the Bambis, since Robert refers to them as newcomers, and the same is likely true of characters like Asnod as well, who were recruited in the present day. However, this is genuinely one of the most intriguing answers we've had from Kubo in a while. Those of us who have always thought Quilge was strong can feel some vindication, though admittedly I do think these fan questions have a tendency to put words in Kubo's mouth a bit and lead him to an answer, but this is a genuinely interesting take nonetheless. It is kind of odd though. I wonder why Quilge was such a perfect all-rounder, almost purpose-built Quincy. Like I said, his Schrift is useless out of battle, so it does make sense that he is skilled enough anyway to also be the combat instructor alongside the hunting army captain. Quilge's list of credentials only continues to grow. Compared to a lot of the other Sternritter, he has seemingly so much more worth. There's one last point I want to make regarding this answer. How old is Quilge? The ages of the various Sternritter are of course completely impossible to discern on the surface. While we don't know for sure, there seems to be a minimum of, I would say, 2 generations of Sternritter, those who participated in and survived the war 1,000 years ago, and those who were recruited in the modern day after Yhwach awoke from his slumber. If Quilge is training the new recruits, then I imagine he comes from that original battle a millennia ago, which is awesome to think about. Anyway, that's really everything about this answer. Like I said, this is a really awesome question, and it relinquished a fascinating answer from Kubo himself. The second question we're looking at this time is perhaps a little more straightforward. Kubo was asked about Gin's Bankai, Kamishini no Yari, and its ultimate ability to turn to dust momentarily, leaving a shard of its blade inside an enemy with which to poison them and destroy their body. The question posed wondered if Gin's Bankai was materially affected by leaving a section of itself behind every time this ability was used. Essentially, if Gin kept using this ability over and over again in fairly quick succession, would his Bankai eventually completely disappear, as he kept removing pieces of it to kill people with over and over again? It's an interesting question. When Gin uses this ability on Aizen, the only time we've ever seen it used, the piece missing from his blade isn't insignificant. In fact, it's actually a fairly substantial chunk. And knowing what we do as of the 1,000-year Blood War arc, damaged Bankai can never be repaired fully back to the way they were. So is Gin ruining his Bankai each time he uses this power, as at least according to Mayuri Kurotsuchi, the only captain he's ever found to have a advantageous relationship with their Bankai is Komamura, as he's so closely linked to it that it's able to repair itself along with Komamura's own wounds. Now, of course, Gin was dead by this point in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but regardless, it does feel like potentially an oversight. However, apparently not, as Kubo's answer is quick to rebuke this idea, saying the piece he leaves behind in his opponent's body is but a secretion of the blade's poison, so after a while, it regenerates. While I guess this does make sense outwardly, it does also kind of feel like Kubo maybe forgot about Gin's Bankai when deciding on the idea that a broken Bankai can never be repaired completely. Honestly, I kind of wish it did remain damaged forevermore. It would add weight to Gin's choice to use this power. It would be a true last-ditch attack, one that Gin knows will seriously and permanently damage his Zanpakuto, but a moment like being able to finally end Aizen's life is worth it to him. However, that's not the case, and it seems like what Kubo is saying is that we shouldn't think of the piece of shrapnel as part of the blade itself, but instead the actual poison that has been released from the sword. Kubo seems to like talking about Gin's Bankai, as he answered a question a few months ago regarding how Gin's Bankai would fare against Askin Naklavar of all characters, which is of course very appealing to me, and a question I'd like to dive into in a future installment of this series. Meanwhile, as for the questions asked last week, the most interesting of the two pertains to Ayon, the monstrous hollow chimera created by the Trebestia by ripping off and fusing their left arms. I'm paraphrasing, but the question technically asks two things. If Orihime were to heal the Trebestia's arms, would Ayon simply disappear? And secondly, if Orihime heals their arms, would it be possible to then summon a second Ayon by initiating the ritual once more? Honestly, these are pretty good questions. Ayon is a very mysterious creature, and the nature of its creation has always been nebulous at best. Now, of course, we've only seen Ayon twice in the story. Once in the Fate Karakura Town battle where it dominated the vice captains before being incinerated by Yamamoto, and again at the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc when the Trebestia summoned it to help defend Hueco Mundo from none other than Quilge Opie, who later killed it using Sclaverai. So these are two very separate instances of summoning and utilising Ayon, but Kubo's answer to the question has some interesting implications. Kubo said, technically if healed, it's possible to create more Ayons. At that point, it depends on the Trebestia's tolerance to pain and being healed again. So this is very intriguing. To me, it implies that every Ayon is technically a brand new creation, especially if he's killed while in battle. So is the Ayon we see in the Fate Karakura Town a totally different chimera to the one we see in the Thousand Year Blood War arc? There are a few small examples of Ayon's behaviour that seem to disprove this theory, though. In the Fate Karakura Town battle, the Trebestia's discussion seems to imply it is the same Ayon, as Sun mentions that she's never known it to respond to anything they say. And later, the version in the Thousand Year Blood War arc seems to show some innate affection towards its creators, as if it knows them personally and instinctively. It's possible, though, that all Ayon variations perhaps just share the same hive mind. Also, Ayon is immensely powerful, overshadowing multiple vice captains even at once. The fact that Trebestius could technically summon multiple of him at the same time is ridiculous to imagine and elevates them above the majority of the other Fraction if they weren't there already. Interestingly, Kubo kind of skipped over the first question that was asked here: would Ayon disappear if the Trebestia's arms were healed? While we don't know for sure, I would wager that no, it wouldn't disappear. We've seen no evidence that Ayon is connected physically to the Trebestia in any way. When Quilge takes out Apache with a stab to the throat, Ayon isn't wounded or anything like that. There doesn't seem to be any kind of a link, so I think he's a completely separate being by the time he's brought to life. And in fact, thinking about it, Kubo's answer kind of covered this too. By saying they could create Ayons plural, it implies that the original one wouldn't disappear. Honestly, this is really quite fascinating to me and shines a light on one of the weirder enigmas of Bleach. And the final question we're looking at this time is a slightly more light-hearted one to cap things off. Kubo was asked about Minazuki, Unohana's Shikai, which takes the form of a gigantic manta ray capable of healing people inside its stomach. The commenter notes that Minazuki's size seems to change dramatically between its appearances in volumes 18 and 21, and wonders if it's due to it consuming its energy by healing people. Kubo's reply, however, is fairly straightforward, and he says, Minazuki can alter its size according to Unohana's will. The smallest it can get is the size of a puppy. First of all, I love the idea of a puppy-sized Minazuki just bounding around the place, but I also have to wonder, what's the point in that? It wouldn't really be able to heal anything bigger than a mouse at that size. At the end of the day, though, this does make sense to me from a sort of foundational level of Bleach lore. I wonder if it's as simple as Unohana, being a captain, having such meticulous control over the size of her Zanpakuto and her Reiatsu output, much in the same way Isshin schools Grand Fisher on how captains aren't swinging around skyscraper-sized Zanpakuto. I wonder if Unohana has that level of control over Minazuki, and that is why. Either way, just a fairly light-hearted one to end off this very first episode of the Klub Outside Q&A Roundup. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed it. Of the 4 questions we looked at this time, definitely the Quilge Opie one was my favourite. It is so fascinating to me that out of nowhere, Kubo just basically reveals this position of combat instructor, that there was a Sternritter potentially teaching other Sternritters how to fight using those traditional Quincy techniques. What's kind of funny to think of, however, though, is if Quilge was teaching other Sternritter, it's a little bit awkward then that none of those Sternritter used any of those techniques whatsoever. The vast majority of these guys rely on their Schrift and their Schrift alone. Which I also do kind of like. It implies some kind of corruption from this new power that they've decided to forego traditional Quincy techniques, but the fact that they are actively being taught how to fight by Quilge, who is much more akin to a traditional Quincy in terms of how he fights, is amusing to me. But yeah, that's it for the video. Let me know which of the answers was your favourite, was the most interesting to you down in the comments below. Was it about Quilge Opie, Gin's Bankai, Ayon, or Minazuki? And yes, do please let me know if this is a series you'd like to see me carry on in the future. We can always go back and retroactively look at some of the more interesting answers, like Gin's Bankai versus Askin as well in the future. I would love to do so. So do please let me know your thoughts down in the comments. But yeah, that's it for the video, guys. I really do hope you enjoyed it. As always, I want to say a massive thank you and give a huge shout out to my Patreon supporters, each and every one of you. It really does mean the world to me, and I really do appreciate it. If you like what I do here over on the channel, you can go and support me over on Patreon as well to get your name in the credits like this and get each and every video completely ad-free. Alright guys, once again, I really hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.